Welcome back to The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. You might be wondering why this part is so long, and that's because, well, we're starting that temple. Last time we did some side questing as both young Link and adult Link, and in this part we're going to be getting to the water temple, everyone's least favorite. I guess it kind of is mine too, not just in terms of like layout, but for the sake of commentary, it's not very good, in my opinion. In order to enter the temple, you need the iron boots and the hook shot. In order to actually beat the temple, you'll need the Zora tunic, I believe, and the bow and arrow. In terms of the way the game wants you to progress through the temples, this one should be the third, but I'm gonna do it second just for the sake of showing off that, you know, you don't need to necessarily go in the order that the game tells you. Kind of like with A Link to the Past, I believe, where you could kind of go to whichever dungeon you want. Doesn't matter really what number dungeon they are. You could kind of do this one first, I suppose, if you go into the forest temple, grab the arrows, and then come back here. But I don't like doing that. When I set foot in a temple, my goal is to beat it, basically. Like, if I don't have the means to beat a temple, I'm not gonna enter it. In terms of this temple, lots of people think it's probably the most annoying one, and I would have to agree. I do not like this temple, at least in this version. It's a lot worse. In the 3DS version, they made the iron boots a sort of C item, so instead you could put it on a hotkey and switch it on and off like that. In this version, you just have to go into the equipment screen and, pick the iron boots to put them on and then pick the regular boots to take them off, which really sucks because going into the equipment screen takes up a lot more time than you think. The 3DS version also changed some aesthetics of the temple to make it more accessible. The whole gimmick of it is that there's 3 levels that the water can be. There's the high level, which it's at now, there's the middle level, and then there's the low level. In order to change the water level, you need to go to specific areas and play Zelda's Lullaby. By doing so, you change the water level, and in the 3DS version, there were basically trails that were around, and each trail would lead you to a different version of the panel, one that would make it low, medium, or high. The way I do this temple is that at every water level, I pretty much go to every place that you can explore. So when it's low, I go to every place. When it's medium, I go to every place. When it's high, I go to every place. And that kind of sucks because it means I have to explore a lot, which I'm perfectly fine with. I like exploring. In fact, I actually like this temple because it makes you go to everywhere at every point, And I think that's actually pretty fun. But I can see why people wouldn't like that. It's very backtracky, and I'm pretty sure I've said before that I'm fine with backtracking. The problem with this is that for the sake of commentary, it means I'm going to be wandering around a lot. I don't have the layout of this temple memorized. I just kind of explore. It's kind of like I'm doing the temple for the first time every time I play it, which honestly is not a good thing. It's more fun for me, but for people watching, it's probably not going to be entertaining because it's so long and there's a lot of actually doing nothing, considering that I'll probably be exploring places that I've already been to because, I'm a dumb and I forgot that there's nothing there at that point or something like that. Here's Princess Ruto though. She's all grown up. It's been 7 years, of course she's gonna grow too. And in the 3DS version, she was actually kind of censored. She has breasts, I guess, now. And in the 3D version, they made it so she kind of has like plates over her chest, acting as kind of like a bra so you can't see it. And, I mean, she's a fish girl. It's not really that big of a deal to change her outfit, but whatever. It's a very minor change, and I'm not up in arms about it. This is actually the second place that you want to go. It makes you think that this is the first place, but it isn't, because there's a place that you can only get to while the water is at the high level, and getting to there means that you can push a block that will come in handy a lot later, because if you don't do it now, you'll have to do a lot of backtracking later, and that kind of sucks, so I decided I'll just do it now. This room has a bunch of spiky rolling dudes. All you need to do is hit them with your hookshot once to kind of make them into rocks, and then hit them again while they're rocks, and that'll kill them. The hookshot is the only weapon you can use underwater, and many enemies will appear underwater. Usually just, shooting them with the hookshot while they're weak is the way to go. The area that Princess Ruto tells you to go to, which is right here, is where the first panel is. Playing Zelda's Lullaby here will make the water level go low. Back in the room where we found Princess Ruto, there were actually a few torches that were unlit. Now that the water level is low, because obviously you can't fire underwater, one of the torches, the central one, is lit. And what the game probably wants you to do is shoot an arrow through the fire and hit the other two torches with it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Din's fire to just light them all. It's kind of similar to a puzzle in the Forest Temple where you had to shoot an arrow through fire while on spinning platforms to hit one switch, but this one really doesn't take any skill, you just have to be a bit precise, so I decided Din's fire was a simpler method and a method that I wouldn't mind using. These clams like to appear underwater a lot. The way to kill them is you need to wait for them to open up their shells and then shoot them with your hookshot in their tongue thing or whatever. And doing this task gets you a small key. What you should be thinking is, well, I got a small key, I should wait until I get more small keys before I try to open any locked doors. It's kind of what the Forest Temple teaches you, because making progress in that temple is mostly, well, if you don't know what you're doing, it's mostly you use up your small keys, try to go through a door, and then get to the end, realize you need another small key, and then try to look for another one. In terms of underwater combat, it's not very difficult. All the enemies are designed to be killed with the hookshot, and dodging underwater is kind of a very finicky thing. When you try to jump, you'll kind of drift around and end up back where you started. It's like I try to do a side jump, I kind of move to the left and then move back to the right, and end up where I was gonna get hit anyways, so I'll get hit. It's not very, it's not a very good thing to rely on underwater, so you shouldn't. You should instead try to kill enemies as quick as possible. All that's really in this room is a gold sculpture, but it does teach you that when the water level rises, these sort of dragon statues rise up as well. And when they do, they reveal hookshot targeting points. So it kind of shows you that when you want to hookshot to places, you should make the water level higher if there are those dragon things around. That gold sculpture was all that was in here, so we'll just keep on keeping on and progressing with the dungeon. There's gonna be a lot of free time for me to just talk about random things, and for the most part they'll be, pertaining to the Zelda series. So I want to actually talk about the timeline now that I have a little free time trying to get back to the central room. The timeline is kind of a train wreck. This game caused a split in the timelines, at least, according to the timeline it caused a split. And basically, now there are three. There's one where Link is an adult, there's one where Link is a child, because there's time travel in this game and that's never a fun thing. And then there's one where Link dies, and that basically leads to all the 2D games. The child one leads to Majora's Mask and Twilight Princess, and Four Swords Adventures for some reason. And then the adult one leads to all the Toon Link games, which is weird because the child one leads to the more dark games and the adult one leads to the more kiddie games. You need to push that block in order to enter this room. The only way you can push it is if the water level is low, because there are these sort of floor panels that rise and lower with the level of the water. So when they're in the middle level, or the top level, you could access doors on those parts as well. But since it's at the bottom level, we can push that block. Back to what I was saying. Before the timeline thing, people kind of already knew that this was the first game in the Zelda series. As in, like, a prequel. Like, I think people thought that A Link to the Past definitely came before Zelda 1 and Zelda 2. And that this came before A Link to the Past. Because of certain things that are in this game. Kind of spoilery, actually. I should kind of stop with that topic. This room has rotating water. It's kind of like, I don't know, a washing machine. That's what I always thought of whenever there were rooms like this. And in order to not be pushed around by the water, you need to wear the iron boots. There's a switch there and a hookshot target. What I like to do is I like to stay where the hookshot target is and kind of make it so that I hit the switch from this point. In the 3DS version, it's a bit easier to hit from farther, but you can still hit it from this area if you get close enough, which I am currently not. And the reason why I do this is because the switch is timed. If you do not, get to where you need to go within the time limit, you're going to be stuck out of it until you push the switch again, or hit the switch again. And it's kind of easy to tell where the switch is because the way everything looks around it is weird. I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of like reflective. So it's not going to look the same as everything that's around it, I guess. Because there's the central actual like switch part of it. The part that glows, like I'm going to hit it now and it's going to turn yellow, the central part. But the kind of shape around it, the glass, you can see it. Just not very well, considering that it's reflecting off of everything else that's blue here. But you can still see it. It kind of distorts it, so you can tell where the switch is. Now that we have this second small key, we can actually make some progression. I mean, we've kind of been progressing this whole time. That's another thing that kind of has to do with backtracking, as I was talking about before. When it comes to backtracking, as long as I'm still progressing forward, like I'm still reaching that end goal, which is, I don't know, finishing the temple in this case, I suppose, I'm fine with it. If it's just like backtracking for no reason, then I guess I would be ticked off about it. But the way backtracking inherently works is like it's stopping you from progressing with the game. But that's not really how I see it, I suppose. The way I see it is more progress. Like, I don't mind that it's the same area that I've been in before, as long as I'm, clearly making my way toward the goal. In this room, which you can only get to while the water level is low or medium, you need to play Zelda's Lullaby at this panel to make the water level medium, or middle. And they give you a clear indication that since that thing is rising, we can now get to whatever's under it. That one's actually a small key that people miss quite a bit, I think. And yes, there's a small key down there. The camera does focus on it a bit more in the 3D version, I think. It kind of makes it a bit more clear that there's an area down here now that the panel or whatever has moved up. In this area, there's a switch with a bunch of enemies that come out of these two sort of grates or cages. The enemies here are just an assortment of enemies we've seen before, the spiky ball kind of guys and the clams. Of course, they're pretty much killed by the same method. You weaken them with the hookshot, or no, you just weaken them in general. So for the clams, it's get close enough to them. For the spiky ball dudes, you need to hit them with the hookshot once, and then hit them with the hookshot when they're weak. So when the spiky balls turn to rocks and when the clams open their mouths, and you'll be able to kill them pretty easily, in my opinion. The next thing we have to do is actually go up through the cage that just opened, and inside of there, we will find another small key. Looking at Link's hand while he was holding out that hookshot kind of reminded me of something. When Link is just around in the temple, sometimes he kind of like moves around a bit. Like when he's underwater and you have the hookshot out, like in the first person point of view, his arm kind of moves around like he's being swayed by the water moving left and right or something like that. That wouldn't be as much of a problem because when you're underwater it's not really that big of a deal, and also it's when using the hookshot, which already has like a laser sight on it, so it's not that big of a deal to me with the hookshot. But sometimes when he's using the bow and arrow, that'll happen. Like he'll kind of just swivel about, and that kind of makes it hard to aim with it, not gonna lie. That room locked behind us, but if we want to get to it again, we could just use Din's fire or shoot an arrow through the torch to light it up, and we can get back into that room if we need to, which we don't at this point. Going back to this room though, where we found Princess Ruto, now that the water level is in the middle, we can go back to an area that we saw before, which kind of had a cracked wall. Whoa, Link's face was kind of whatever. This cracked wall here obviously requires a bomb, but again, this ain't no Twilight Princess. We don't have water bombs. We can't just blow this up while we're underwater. Now that we've done that, we can get inside and grab yet another small key. We've already gotten 4 small keys, and we've only opened 1 door with them. That's kind of worse than the Forest Temple, because I think at one point we did have 3 small keys, but we kind of used them all up in a row. Like the path that we were taking that used the small keys, it was like there's a locked door to enter the path, and then there's a locked door midway through the path, and then there's a locked door at the end of the path, and then there's like no more small keys after that. But now it's like you open a locked door, we'll have 2 more keys, and now open 3 more locked doors, and it's kind of weird, but it is how you get through the temple, so I'm not gonna complain about it. This room here, I'll agree with that guy for once. It's kind of BS. Like, you need to hit a switch that's far away, and you can hit it with the hookshot. You don't need the bow and arrow to hit it. But I'm gonna have to use it because my aim with the hookshot sucks. Oh, never mind. Oh well. Anyway, the reason that it's BS is because there's a random Tektite waiting for you at the top that just comes down on you and attacks you, and it blindsides you because you can't aim up, or at least you can't look up. There's no free roaming 360 camera in this game, and there's no way to control a camera except with the gyroscope in 3DS version, I guess, because this was the original 3DS. There's no C nub with which you may control the camera. We unlocked that, well, not unlocked the door, we rose the water level, so now we can unlock this door. Now that the water level is back at the top, we can finally enter what is basically the first locked door that we saw. And in this room is some panels with hookshot targets. What you basically need to do is hookshot up them, kind of like, I guess, a ladder made from them. It's honestly a bit of a chore to do this, mostly because the way that the control stick is, it's very sensitive, so aiming with the hookshot, I think, is a bit of a challenge. It's not too difficult, obviously, thanks to the awesome laser sight technology in this piece of, well, I wouldn't call it ancient technology, but the hookshot kind of seems a bit modern for a Legend of Zelda game, considering that it's probably like old-timey European kind of era, I guess. And again, we have these dragon statues. You need to hit the switch in the correct order. Well, yeah, in the correct order, I guess, after hookshotting to certain statues or certain areas in order to progress with this room. The switch will change from blue to red, blue meaning that the water level is up, and red meaning that the water level is low. With the water level high, obviously the dragon statue things will be up, but with the water level low, you can actually climb on top of the dragon statues to make progress. If you do screw up with this puzzle, then basically all you have to do is start it over. You don't have to like enter and exit the room. You just have to get back to the first area that you were at, where the door is basically. For example, if I were to say hookshot to this area without like making the switch low again, then I'd have to basically swim back to the beginning of the room. And if I were to, I don't know, hookshot to some area while the switch was low, I'd have to go into the water and hit it again. And you know, it's not that big of a deal if you hit the switch at the wrong time, is what I'm trying to say. You're not gonna, have a bunch of snakes or ropes fall down on you. It's no biggie. And it's not that hard of a room. It's mostly trial and error if you don't know what you're doing. There's these two Texites here, but now we have a new enemy, this like. And this is not a fun enemy. If he eats you, he will steal things from you. In the original Legend of Zelda, these enemies were a stack of pancakes that stole your magical shield. The magical shield being the weapon, well, not the weapon, but the item that you use to reflect basically non-physical projectiles. So it can block Octorok rocks and, like arrows and stuff thrown by moblins. But it can also block, Zora's magical blasts or Wizrobe's attacks. In this game, it can steal your Hylian shield, or your Deku shield, I guess, if you get eaten by one as young Link. Which I don't think actually happens. I don't remember seeing any as young Link. But it can also steal your tunic. And that really sucks, because if it does steal your tunic, that means you either have to go buy a new one, or if you kill it fast enough, you could get both of your items back. This is Dark Link. He basically reflects attacks that you do. So if you do a horizontal slash, he's going to do a horizontal slash. If you do a stab, however, he will instead jump onto your sword and attack you if you've hit him enough. The more you hit him, the more aggro he gets. However, he does not have the Bigoron sword. So if you try to attack him with that instead, you'll end up winning in the end. I tried to kind of use the Master Sword a bit, but, he's reflecting all my attacks, so I decided just stabbing with the Bigoron sword was the way to go. Honestly, I think the Bigoron sword is kind of overpowered in this game. There's a lot of enemies where you could just kind of try to rapid stab them, and they'll go down. And they're supposed to be, like, on par enemies with Link, like Stalfos and stuff like that, Wolfos. You can kind of just spam the Bigoron sword and win. That was a pretty trippy room. It looked kind of like a beach, but it was all an illusion. And now that we've beat the mini-boss of this dungeon, we can get the dungeon item. It's not really a new item, it's an upgrade, the long shot. Now the hookshot can go twice as far, which is great because, honestly, it feels a bit lackluster when you first get it. Another thing that they changed in the 3DS version, that time block was a bit higher, so it'd be sticking out of the ground, so it'd be easier to tell that there's a time block there. This room here has a bunch of vortexes, which Navi will also happily warn you about. You can either kind of walk around with the iron boots on, but what I like to do is kind of force my way through the current. If you kind of get caught in a vortex, if you normally swim, you're not going to get very far away from it. But if you rapidly tap the B button, which will make you swim faster, you can actually escape the current. Or the torrent. Whirlpool. Yeah. There's a gold sculpture in this room that you can get while standing still underwater, of course using the long shot. Thank goodness for that extra range though, because now it just makes a lot of things more convenient. Getting out of this room, in my opinion, is a bit of a chore, honestly. There's a hookshot target. Well, not really a hookshot target. There's a chest on the other side of this gate here. But in order to get to the other side of this gate, you need to first flick that switch so that the gate opens up, and then hookshot onto the chest. But thanks to the finicky, control stick that I'm using, which is very, I guess, imprecise, it moves around a bit too much, even if I'm just tapping it very lightly. it makes it pretty hard to actually latch onto it. There is a bit of leeway when it comes to these kinds of puzzles, I guess you'd call them, because this does happen again at a later point. But if your hookshot gets past the gate after you've kind of shot it, obviously, and you hit the chest, you'll kind of go through the gate and get to the chest, so you have more time than you think. Like, as soon as the gate starts closing isn't the end of your time limit. Once the gate is completely closed, that's when you're done. That last room looked pretty familiar. It was the washing machine room, as I like to call it. Now we're basically back in the central area of the dungeon, and I could have gotten the compass a long time ago, and I'm kind of now realizing that I don't have it, which isn't that big of a deal. I mean, I kind of don't need it, considering the way that I explored this dungeon, even though I haven't memorized it at all. Since we have to backtrack a little more, I think I'm going to talk about another topic that I wanted to talk about before, but I just haven't had the time because it's been so chock full of other things. Link himself. I think a lot of people would think that Link is a lucky guy, considering the amount of girls that have their eyes on him. And, you know, it's kind of weird because Link is supposed to be a blank slate in this game. Like, he doesn't really show much personality or anything like that. Although, there are some hints as to what his personality is like. He's not, he's not completely blank. For example, you can tell that he has a sense of curiosity when you see the Great Deku Tree. Well, not the Deku Tree himself, the Sprout. He kind of leans over and looks at it. Whenever he sees Sheik, he always tries to walk towards them, I guess in an attempt to figure out who they are or who he is. Another thing is the actions that he takes on his quest. Obviously, Link is a very helpful person, and this is forced by the story because whenever you play as Link, you have to help these people. I mean, unless you end it by just turning the game off or something like that. But Link is a nice person. He's willing to help others, not really expecting much of a reward. At least, it seems like that, considering that one of the options when you get the third spiritual stone is that you don't want anything really. It gets a bit more expanded upon when you consider a game like, well, Skyward Sword. There are times during that game where you have different choices, kind of like, I guess, a Persona game, where the different choices kind of have different bits of personality even though they're kind of the same choice. Like saying of course or I will or something like that. Those two sound very similar in terms of what they mean, but in the end they show either, that Link is formal with someone or that he's nonchalant when it comes to a lot of situations, things like that. Another case being more so with the Hyrule Historia, I suppose. It says that during Majora's Mask, Link actually does all the side quests because he gets a certain mask that requires you to do all the side quests, thus reinforcing the fact that he is a good person, He likes to make people happy. Alright, enough of the sappiness. Now we're actually going to be going to new places. In this room, there's a hookshot target above this platform over here, and if you're able to get to it, which I do badly, you can actually kind of hear that there's a gold skulltula in this room. The only way that you can get it is by using the long shot. Luckily, the game forces you to go to this room again because you kind of need to raise the water level to the middle section in order to progress. So it's on the way. It's not too far off the beaten path, so I'll get it. Now that the level is in the middle though, there is a room that we can enter that kind of has to do with another way we entered a room before. I don't know why I'm trying to not spoil it. Basically, we have to shoot the bow and arrow into, an eye switch, and then shoot the hook shot onto a target. This is the section right here. I'm not sure if this is just in the 3DS version. Maybe it's in this version too. But for some reason, I find it a bit difficult to get into this room. Basically, I think what the game is trying to do is make it so that if you stand directly in front of this switch and you take out your hook shot, you'll automatically like be on the s- the target, so you can hook shot to it immediately. In the 3DS version, that is true. In this version, you're kind of just below it, and again, the very precise analog, well, not actually precise, like the very twitchy analog stick controls kind of make it hard to lock onto that, or not lock on, to just hit it. This block here, this block was the block that we pushed at the very beginning of the dungeon while the water level was high. You needed to do that in order to progress, because now that we've done it here, if we were to, say, have not done that, we would need to pull it out and then come out through here and then go back into that room where we just were in, so shoot the eye switch and do the hook shot again, and then push it again, so it saves time. Another bit of tangential information that I like to talk about is the music in this game. It's, in my opinion, not that good. At least the dungeon music isn't. I'm not a very big fan of it. In terms of, like, the overworld, I could hum Hyrule Field. Kokiri Forest and the Lost Woods are pretty good. And Kakariko, it's not that great. I mean, I'm kind of used to Kakariko considering that it's in so many Zelda games. It's kind of bored me. And the Ocarina songs, I think, are great, even though, like, Zelda's Lullaby isn't actually from this game. It's from A Link to the Past, but, you know, it's still a good song. I think all of the Ocarina songs are pretty good. The only place where the music in this game actually falls for me is either out at night, because there is no music, or inside temples, because I think temple music isn't that good. It's atmospheric, it's fine in that regard, but it's not a tune that I can hum, you know? Like, I'll hum the tunes in, like, A Link to the Past's temples, or, I don't know, Stone Tower Temple in Majora's Mask is really good, but this game is just, they're not very memorable. And you, viewers, do not know how happy I am to be on, like, the last 10 minutes of this temple, and you're probably pretty happy that we're on the last 10 minutes too, because this has been long and drawn out and very annoying. And I haven't even been talking about the temple for a good chunk of this part, like less than 50%, but still, this just, it bogs down the pace when you're doing a let's play of this game. I like it on its own, you know, I've played Ocarina of Time so many times, and, you know, this temple isn't something that stops me from playing the game. I enjoy it. It's just, for the purposes of doing a commentary, it's not very fun. But we're nearing the last stretch of it, and for the most part the last stretch is pretty linear. There's not much that there is to miss in that area, and there's not a lot of exploring in that area either. It's pretty straightforward. But now we're actually finally getting the compass. You can actually get it before you get the long shot, but I was a dunce and I decided, you know what, I'm gonna get the compass last, because I don't know, I just decided to. Anyway, the way to get it is, since there's this water thing in front of it, you can't really open the chest, so you need to hit the switch, and the switch is actually really fast. Like, it'll turn off in the matter of like 2 seconds. But if you're fast enough, you can get the compass, although now that I've gotten pretty much every chest in this area, the only purpose it serves is to, I guess, show me what rooms I've been in last, you know? Those enemies that were in this room are also ones that we hadn't seen before. They were physically similar to the ones that were in Jabu Jabu. Basically, like, weird stingray kind of things. Obviously, shooting them with the hookshot is the way to kill them, because they're in the water, and the only way to kill things in the water is with the hookshot. They're pretty aggro compared to their young Link counterpart. They actively go after you, which makes them a bit more difficult to deal with, I think. Especially considering that the hookshot can only target one of them at a time and thus only really kill one of them at a time. The boss key in this dungeon, because it's an adult dungeon, so obviously it's going to have a boss key, is probably my least favorite when it comes to having to look for it, because the key itself is hidden away behind 2 locked doors, and those 2 locked doors are usually what prevents me from getting to it. I usually only have 1 key when I'm going for it, so I have to go through the dungeon again, and actually I often restart the dungeon because I don't have the key. Like I need to do it in a specific order. Like I don't like having to go back through a bunch of rooms to get just a key. I guess that's the case of backtracking where I don't like it. I don't want to go through a bunch of rooms just to get a small key. You can only access this area if you have the long shot. And going into this area, there are a bunch of blue tektites, along with the sort of swerving water effect to where the water will actually pull you towards certain directions. It's kind of weird. It's not in a circle in this room. It's pulling you towards either of the corners, which is where the whirlpools are, so I guess that makes sense. And there are a bunch of boulders in this room as well. They're not going to really do anything to you because for the most part you're going to be on the surface of the water. There's not really a need to go underneath. If you know about the trick where you have to, tap the B button a bunch of times to get faster in the water. What I like to do is I like to take the tektites out at the beginning because the tektites are, a chore to have to deal with. And the way I like to do it is I like to hit them as they're coming down from their jump. Usually if they're doing a jump and they fall into water, they kind of go a bit beneath the water before they come up and try to jump again. So that's an easy way to take them out. When it comes to them being on the surface, what I like to do is I like to try to shoot my arrow a bit preemptively so that it hits them as they touch the ground, because there's going to be no delay between when they jump again if they're on the ground rather than in the water. This room requires that you bomb both of these walls, and in doing so there will be a block behind the walls, so you have to push onto the switch over here because it's one of those switches where you need to hold the switch down in order to keep the effect going. Of course, since it's dealing with pushing blocks, it's going to be a bit of a slow room. There is a way to tell if a wall is breakable if it's not, specifically stated, like it's discolored or it has a crack in it. If you slash your sword at a wall, it makes a certain sound. And if you slash your sword at a wall that's breakable, then it makes a lower pitched sound. That means you can just blow it up and progress like that. What I like to do with this block is I like to pull it out just a little bit because I think pushing it is actually faster than pulling it. And you can kind of get between the wall and the block even though Link clearly shouldn't fit. In fact, if you pull a block towards the wall, then you can't put it all the way in. Like, how should I put this? When you're pulling a block, there's obviously going to be a certain amount of space between you and the wall once you pull it as far as it can go. When it comes to being young Link, the amount of distance that can be between the wall and the block when you've pulled it all the way to the wall is about 1 block space. When it's adult Link, it's about 2, so you need to go around and push it 2 times instead of just once. This room is another case of hitting the switch so that the water will rise. And this is what I was talking about before, how Link's hand will kind of move around a lot in this room. It's weird, as if there's some sort of water here, but there isn't. I think, though, there's actually a water effect coming back into this room. Like, for some reason, Link will, when he comes up, there will be like water effects at his feet when you hookshot back up onto the onto the platform where the switch is to make the water rise. The fountains, I mean, that you can use as platforms. Like, you'll see it right here. See, there was water trailing behind Link, like little ripples. And that doesn't make sense. It might have to do with the fact that the surface of the floor here is puddled. Like, if you walk on it, you'll see ripples of water. I don't know. Either way, it makes it harder to aim. There's a gold sculptura on this wall, which is pretty easy to get. And this is where the boulders come from. What you need to do is wait for a boulder to come so you can get behind it and actually go beneath the water here. Obviously, you need to put on the iron boots so you can get down to the surface. And this is the reason why you need another key. There's another locked door past here. Oh, here's a rare occurrence of a clam actually attacking. They try to kind of swim with their backs towards you, try to ram at you because their backs are spiky, so obviously that's gonna hurt. All we need to do is go up to the surface. I thought there was a hookshot target, so, you know, it would make it a bit easier, but going to the surface leads to another locked door, and behind this locked door is nothing but the boss key. So finally, we can actually beat the dungeon. One thing that you can do after you get the boss key, because the locked door, well, the boss door is at the beginning of the dungeon, you can play the Serenade of Water, and by playing it, you can warp to the panel right above the dungeon, and thus you can enter the dungeon pretty quickly. And since it's at the entrance, you can get to the boss door and such. Although, I don't do that. And I think the water level stays at whatever level it's at if you exit and enter the dungeons. Like, if it's at the bottom level, it'll be at the bottom level if you exit and re-enter. So if the water level is low, you're not going to be getting to the boss door very quickly. But since I think we have it high right now, all we have to do is get to the top and open the door. One last kind of tangential thing about the dungeons is the way the dungeons look. In the Forest Temple, it didn't really seem like a dungeon. It was more like a mansion, actually. And, you know, there were sections where you went outside and it was kind of like they had interior gardens or something like that. With this, it actually kind of looks like a temple, I suppose. And, you know, it's for Zoras, so obviously there'd be a lot of water everywhere. And that explains, you know, who goes to this temple. But with the Forest Temple, it's not really clear who the Forest Temple belonged to, because the Kokiri didn't really go to it. They stood in the forest. But now we're in the final room, and these sliding blade things, you obviously need to avoid them as you walk up, and Link walks up slowly. If you turn around and backwalk up the slope, I think you'll do it at normal backwalking speed, so you can get up pretty quickly at the cost of not seeing what's going on. And that was Princess Ruto's dialogue happening, although it didn't stop you from moving around. You could actually trigger the boss before even letting her finish. You can tell that it's Ruto because Navi's text is blue all the time, so, you know, the text was white. And now we have the boss of the dungeon, Morpha. Morpha is a weird being. Usually in, like, art and stuff, the ball is supposed to be an eye, but here it just looks like a ball. That's pretty much it. And there's the whole water controlling thing as well. Ruto says that this water isn't natural, and it actually isn't. Swimming inside of it is not, you know, what you want to do. What you want to do is actually stand in the corner and wait for one of Morpha's kind of big tail things to come out, and usually the core will be in one of those tails. So you want to hookshot the core out of the tail and bring it toward you. If you get the tail like behind you while you're in a corner, you can keep doing horizontal slashes and kind of kill it like that. Although I'm not able to do it with that much finesse, so 4 hits from the Bigoran sword ought to do it in. Another thing is, those central platforms, they're pretty useless, I think. The only thing I ever use them for is to start up the boss. Morpha can actually send out multiple tails at you. Well, I call them tails. But if Morpha does send out one that doesn't have the actual core in it, just walk around a bit, and usually it'll send out a second one to your like later location, and thus you'll be able to hit it. There are also hookshot targets along the walls if you need to get from wall to wall quickly, I suppose, but they're not very useful. Honestly, there's a lot in this room that doesn't do much, like the spikes around and stuff. But I lied, it was actually like 5 hits, and now Morpha's dead. A more unique boss dying animation. The water in this pool is kind of drained out through the top of the area. In the 3DS version, it kind of looks like there's those like fire sprinklers at the top of the room, so it looks like there's actually a way for Morpha to get out. But in this version, Morpha just leaves through the ceiling, and a big drop appears, revealing the exit warp rather than a heart container. But a heart container still appears right next to it, so we'll grab it and exit the temple in the next part.